I was talking about decolonization, right? And it is very important, first of all, to know why we are discussing it right now, right? There has been a major change in our society in the last 7, 8 years. The two changes are a change in the government, and the other is the explosion of social media, which has put us in contact with each other like never before, right? So, therefore, we are raising questions. We are asking questions about ourselves, about our society, what has been told to us as truth for the last 70 years. And that is a starting point for decolonization. So that is what is happening right now. That did not happen in 1947 because the narrative was in the hands of people who did not want such a process to take place. So, what do we understand by colonization and decolonization? Colonization is a process which is different from colonialism, as Albert Memmi famously talked about. Colonization is a process in which the colonizer exercises control over the people whom he has colonized. So it is a process of establishing control over large groups, over large societies, right? Okay. Uh, uh, Colonialism is the political control over those people. So the two are quite different from each other, right? Colonialism is political. Colonization is something which is psychological. This is done psychologically over the people you want to establish control. You want to establish control over. Like the British, for example, they were experts in that. They studied us psychologically. For example, everything from the building of the Andaman, the cellular jail, for example, sending select groups of people abroad for higher studies, to setting up institutions. They studied us psychologically in a very methodical, deep, manner. And after that, they uh, went ahead and exercised it in such a way that it became a macro, level phenomena. That is how they exercised control over us. Now, what happens when a colonizer exercises control over the colonized? The colonized have two feelings that are most prominent. That is shame and humiliation. They constantly live under these two emotions. And for centuries, these have been the two predominant feelings in which primarily the Hindu society has lived in: shame and humiliation. Now, if we ask ourselves, where does this, shame, come from, right? This shame is deeply ingrained at a mass level that it is not something that we are even aware of. Okay, let uh, let me give you an example about my father. My father was, quite dark, and the first time I went to Europe and I came back, that was almost 30, 35 years back. He looked at the picture and he said, "Oh, you are the only person of color amongst all these white people." So I said, "Yeah, I had not noticed it till then." But what I noticed in him was a sense of pride that my son has arrived. A person of color is there in a picture with only white people, right? So, and he was a person who was very well read, very literate, very a very scholarly person. But somewhere this feeling remained, the distinction between color and whiteness, that people who are white are somewhere superior and better, and people who are of color, as they can reach their level, but they can never be better than them, right? So there was a deep feeling of shame, of humiliation that he carried, and people of his generation carried. And because I was a psychologist, it would often come up that, where is all this coming from, right? So the decolonization process is removing that shame and humiliation from our minds, to think independently, to think autonomously, without having a reference to color, to race, to any other criteria that makes us feel that we are inferior and that we are less than them. So that is the process of decolonization, and that is something that has started right now after almost 70 years of independence. This would have continued had possibly the political party that was ruling us had continued, because they took over from the British, and they did not let any change come about in a society at a macro level, at a large level, so that we start thinking independently with our self-respect coming up, and living by itself. Our first prime minister was probably, he did not even understand that there has to be a process of decolonization that has to begin. He was very much rooted in English ethos, English culture, English philosophy, and he thought of them that Indians can only emulate them, that Indians should need to turn away from them, was not there in his philosophy or in his worldview. The next prime ministers who came, the leaders who came, nobody thought about it. So it was the first time that possibly the present Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, who came over, he was not into any of those molds in which the previous leaders were. And that was one of the major reasons that this process of decolonization has started. And we are looking at our roots, we are looking at our heritage, we are looking at our culture and civilization as if we are doing it for the first time. So this is a process of decolonization. It's a psychological process. It is not a political process. And let's also face this, that many other societies, many other groups have gone through this, right? For example, the Jews went through something similar, where they separated themselves from what was their previous identity and what was their next, what is their present identity. For example, 100 years back, if you asked a Jew that, who are you? He would say, I'm a German Jew. He retained the word Jew, but he brought the word German in between, or I'm a French Jew, or I'm an American Jew. They would talk of themselves like that. But the Holocaust changed that, and they started talking of themselves that I'm simply a Jew, right? So it was a major change, a change of identity that came about in them as to who they are, right? In the same way, a decolonization process in India, in our country, will take place when we start saying, I'm simply a Hindu, that's it. There is no other identity that I have. It is not that I'm a Kshatriya, I'm a Brahmin, I'm this and this, I'm a Kashmiri Pandit, or I'm a Keralite Brahmin. So when all those identities get erased and we simply start saying that I'm a Hindu, the decolonization process may be said to, come about and exist. So that is what I would say is the process of decolonization. It has started, and we are somewhere in the second phase of it right now, because it goes through several phases. So I would say that maybe another 15, 20 years, given the way things are going, we may be said to arrive at a stage where we can say that it has really happened. So let us hope for that. So that is, I would say, in a nutshell, is the process of decolonization. And I would ask you that if there are questions that you have, we can discuss that about the whole process.
And so, as you said, it is more about the psychology than when we speak about it in political terms. But generally, people associate it with political domination when we speak about colonization. So, sir, having said that, if you could throw light on how it is going to affect the future of Bharatvarsh if we are not going to take the process of decolonization seriously as of yet.
Okay. The first process in decolonization is questioning. we begin to question, we begin to ask ourselves that, okay, this is the identity that has been thrust upon us, but this is not the true identity. There are many lies involved with that. There is an explosion of questioning. Why is it so, right? Now, for example, in one of my earlier articles, which I wrote about, I mean, Birla Mandir, I talked about that Birla Mandir is the oldest Hindu temple in a large-scale Hindu temple in New Delhi, built in 1939. Now, the thing is, why was it built in 1939? Because the freedom movement at that time was at its peak. So people felt deeply nationalistic, and they built the first large temple in India after centuries. Right now, in this situation, what would be the decolonization process? If we go to Birla Temple, and I'm sure that you have also gone, I have also gone, have we seen this history written outside the temple anywhere? No, we have not, right? Decolonization process would mean that outside every temple, a history of the struggle, the suffering of the Hindus who have gone through this is written down and described, so that the millions of people who go through that, who read it, are able to assimilate that within themselves. And a process starts at a national level where we talk about that how our ancestors on such a massive level unknown in history anywhere else actually went ahead and fought and struggled. So this feeling of struggle, and that we have gone through all the suffering in order to keep our religion alive, needs to be imbibed in all of us, in all the children, right? That is how this will grow and become a mass movement. So decolonization would begin with the question, why is it so? Why is it that it has not been thought of or talked of before, right? For example, this example that I give of Birla Temple very often, uh, it is nowhere written outside about the history of the temple. It is written that it's built in 1939 by Birla family, by Gandhiji himself came to inaugurate it. But the struggle and the history of the temple, the struggle and history of Hinduism, how it tried to survive, is not something that is openly talked about. So decolonization means going into that hidden history, that part of ourselves that is not talked about it, right? In the same way that Kashmir Files is being talked about right now, a hidden history, a hidden part of ourselves is what decolonization would bring up. So the moment we are talking of something forbidden, something hidden, something that we don't talk about, then the process of decolonization begins. So with India, it will begin with its temples, its institutions, all of them which were destroyed, whether it was the Gurukuls that were destroyed, whether it was the universities of Nalanda and all other schools and institutions, how the language was changed to English, what Macaulay said. It is written in textbooks. So children can ask that who was this Macaulay who said all these things about India? That is the process of decolonization. I learned about Macaulay from my father. I never learned about him in my school textbooks. Why it should not be there, right? That is the process of decolonization. Now, if you see, for example, the similar educational structures in other countries, German children, for example, are taught that how they should not create another World War-like situation. It is there in the school curriculum. So every German child today, for the past almost 70 years, has grown up with a deep sense of guilt that, yes, my ancestors created this. They killed so many people. They, built the worst machine meant for human slaughter in the history of mankind. So it is my duty and responsibility to see that I don't do that, right? Similarly, for Jewish children, for French children, right? American children, for example, are right now taught about indigenous history, right? Well, somebody told me that they are learning that how Columbus did not discover America, right? Okay. America existed before that. Now, in a similar way, a similar process needs to begin us for us over here into our pedagogy so that we also can start questioning things which have been taught to us. And that is how the process of decolonization would begin for us, and it should go that way.
Yeah, so as you said about textbooks and how history has been portrayed for so long, this brings me to my next question. And as it is said that until the lion tells his side of the story, the tale of the hunt will only glorify the hunter. So similarly, decolonization, if we have to start that process, it has much to do with the correct portrayal and representation of a national and civilizational identity. Here we see that the history, which has been repeatedly told, it has severed us from our own identity and projected our story from an alien point of view, where we have glorified the invaders, colonizers, and termed our ancestors as terrorists and revolutionaries. So, should we not start by rewriting the history, and should our efforts must first go here? Your comments on this point, sir, because there is so much
Yeah.
of debate on rewriting of history going on in the country.
Yeah, it's a very healthy debate because, and if you look at history, all great historians agree about one thing, that history is always rewritten. History is always redecided. There is no final history, right? So if history is always rewritten, so it always also happens by questioning what has been taught as history. For example, when the when the communist government fell in 1989, for some time no history was taught in those countries because it was realized that the history which has been taught is so falsified that they felt that they need the time in order to go ahead and get over and then start a new a new history for themselves, a true and more correct history, as you talked about, right? But I look at it more as not just correct and incorrect history. I look at history which somewhere completely obliterates the notion of justice, the notion of fairness, right? What John Rawls talked about, that there is a lack of fairness and justice which is taught in Indian history. So if I say, for example, that it is correct versus incorrect, then I'm only talking of making some corrections. No, it is not corrections. Let's be very clear about this. We are not talking about corrections over here. It is not that Akbar ruled from, say, 15, whether he ruled up to 1525 or 1530. That is correction, right? The fact is that Akbar killed 30,000 people, and that is not included. That is an injustice that has been hidden from us. That is something that needs to be told. And when we look at the fact that the way history has been taught to us or is being taught to us, there is an issue of injustice involved over here, then we will feel motivated enough to change it. Because if we talk about only correction and what is correct and what is incorrect, where will the motivation to change history come from? Right. So, for example, that Subhash Chandra Bose gave, his INA, the terror that he created gave India freedom, versus the fact that the British were not at all afraid of Gandhi or Nehru, right? It should it be seen as something correct or incorrect, or should it be seen as something just and unjust, right? So for me, the issue is between justice and injustice. And today, what Indians are dealing with is an issue of injustice that they have to correct. So once that happens, then a sense of personal anger rises, that I am someone who has been fooled, I'm someone who has been cheated. And then the next question comes, that who did it? Why did they do it? Why did they cheat me? Why did they fool me like that? Right? And then when I start a journey like that, that is the true journey of how history needs to be changed. So history needs to be changed in the direction of providing greater justice, of telling me as to, okay, where I stand today, who is responsible for that, and rather than who is not. So that is the way I would, see it a battle between justice and injustice, not as something between what is correct and incorrect. The second is that we also need to ask ourselves that who hid the history from us. Why is it that history is being hidden? What is the purpose or goal or motive in hiding things that happened, say, 70 years back, 100 years back, or 200 years back? What difference does it make? Why is it that so many learned people, or I would say so called learned people, are trying to hide important things from us which happened 100, 200, 300 years ago? Right? Why is it that we are not focusing on the present, on the now? The thing is that this group, this intellectuals group, is trying to hide it from us with a very ulterior motive. And that motive is something very simple, is that once we start questioning and realizing that our self-esteem begins to rise, because self-esteem is linked to anger. If I'm angry, if I feel that I have been cheated, my self-esteem is something that begins to rise. I start questioning. And that is something that this so-called learned group of people did not want to happen. So everything over the last 100, 200, 500 years have been hidden just like an iceberg, so that like the earlier generations who did not realize it, this generation could have also passed and gone ahead so that it never gets known. But this was not to be. The change came in the form of the rise of Shri Narendra Modi and also the social media. People started asking uncomfortable questions. Things could no longer be stated in a straitjacket form anymore. And as time goes by, it will give rise to more, transparency. That is what is something that is happening right now, almost in a form of an explosion. That's the way I see it.
Yes, very rightly you said, and I also feel that there is a strategic mechanism into play, and not just accidental miss out of things. They have strategically hidden facts and used a particular perspective to portray our civilization. Also, when we speak about the constitution, so nowhere in the constitution is it mentioned about our civilization antiquity, so to speak. And also it basically is deprived of the voices of great men such as Aurobindo, Tilak, and Savarkar. And as you mentioned about Netaji, his foreign policy, or all the efforts he put into bringing freedom to India, and basically he leveraged his foreign policy skills into bringing freedom, and that's a fact we know today. And all of this is hidden from us. And as a student of political science, I have read about Marx, I have read about Lenin in college, but there was no Aurobindo, there was no Tilak. So, sir, what is your opinion and on how we should take this forward and into academics, basically?
Okay. Since I also belong to in academics and I'm a professor myself, so I think I probably would like to share by saying, for example, I teach forensic psychology, which is one of my papers, and I have worked for almost 15 years with uh, helping the law enforcement to investigate crimes. Okay, we separate crimes, for example, into two groups, right? The organized crime and disorganized crime, right? Now, the thing to hide the history, the truth from an entire society is an organized crime. It is something that has been done systematically through a long, drawn out thought process, so that the people that to whom, which is the target audience, generation after generation, do not get in touch with their roots. Now, who did that? The British did that. Their purpose was to disconnect us from our roots, from our heritage. And when they left, the people who came after that, they continued on that process so that we don't get in touch with our roots, with our heritage, with our glory. So they only continued in that, and that is the decolonization narrative. So the more we connect ourselves to our past, to our glory, and this is not something which is just done through, giving us facts and figures, but it is also done through questioning, through imagination. Like, for example, the British destroyed Indians from writing novels, from writing fiction, right? If you notice, for example, that there was very little fiction produced in the British India. What was there was actually anti-Indian, and even right now, the fiction that is produced in India, for example, mostly by left liberal writers, is anti-India, right? It is not something that makes Indians connect to their heritage, to their roots. So the power of imagination was completely lost, right? If you see the great Russian writers, the great American writers, everyone wrote about the power of imagination to the able to change a society, right? It is something that still has not happened in India. And one of the decolonization narratives would be that there would be a literary boom, poems, writing, films, which would change the way we look at ourselves and the world. That is something that is, I believe, very much in the offing. And I think the thing of Kashmir Files is probably just one such opening that is taking place right now.
Yes, definitely. And also post 2014, with the advent of Modi ji and as he took over, there are a lot of positive things also happening. And we can say to some extent that efforts are now being taken to decolonize different spheres. Sir,
Right.
I was going through one of your articles and where you have written that on Ram Mandir actually, that when the British left the shores of India on 15th August 1947, Indians celebrated thinking it to be our independence. But on 5th August 2020, they may just celebrate another independence, a task that was left unfinished and which 1947 didn't accomplish freedom from fear, injustice, humiliation for a people used to slavery. So, sir, your comments on this?
That's a very good question. And what I would like to say is that, you know, there are three qualities that identified colonizer. As Albert Memmi, he talked about, and also Frantz Fanon. The three qualities were profit, that was one, privilege, and usurpation. You usurp the, land, the goods of another person, right? And if you see that the political class and the political climate in India has been defined also by these three things: profit. There is massive corruption in India, which has gone unchecked and it increased almost to a big point, right? Okay. The first, as we talked about, is profit. The second is privilege. And the last is to usurp, right? So whether it is assumption of land, assumption of things, this has gone on unabated, and it reached a point, for example, which reached its peak in the last Congress government. And I'm naming it specifically because we all know the scams and all that took place, right? This is exactly like the way the British government operated, right? They looted India without consideration. The same thing also was happening, say, for example, 2004 to 2014, and even before that. No, difference, right? This is the colonization process that has continued and that has come to a stop. I would say coming to a stop right now. I would say it's fully come to a stop because it takes time, right? Now, coming to the second part of your question, what you talked about, the Ram Mandir. As a psychologist, for me, Ram Mandir is not a religious issue. I see it as an issue for justice. In fact, if you see if you see historically, all over the world, wherever people have, say, for example, lost a piece of land which has been sacred for them, or where they have lost something which they had once, but they no longer had anymore, restoring it to them has been seen as part of restorative justice, right? So in the same way, if we look at the Ram temple, it is a issue of justice. It is the issue of a community of a people trying to reclaim what was destroyed, what was lost. It is not a religious issue at all. But all this while it was seen, it was made into a religious issue, is was Ram actually a figure? Why don't we, go ahead and, build a school or something over there? The fact that Hindus also have a need for justice, the fact that they want justice for themselves, was something that was completely disconnected from them. Now, this is the decolonization narrative, that people who are slaves should not think or should not ask for justice, right? Now, if we look at, for example, all the wrongs which have been done to Hindus, and if we start talking about it, we are not doing something unusual. We are talking about our need for what is the wrongs which have been done to us throughout history, right? If you see, for example, the Dakota pipeline in USA, the Native Americans gathered over there protesting and saying that this is their sacred space. Their ancestors lived there. The whole world came and said, "What are you doing? You are, it is something that happened long back, and how can you go back to it?" They supported the Native Americans. They applied for their connection, their rootedness to the land, and because they saw that the land is something sacred. So if it can be sacred for one group, if it can be sacred for one society, why it should not be sacred for another society, right? So the same thing is what I would say is about the issue of the Ram Mandir. When the Hindus have laid the claim to that, what was once really theirs, and they have owned and possessed it once again, it is an issue of fairness, it is an issue of justice, and most important is it is an issue of liberation in which they were chained earlier. So that is the way I see that it is something that which liberates us. The more we question what has been taken away, and the more we ask for it, asking it back for ourselves, the more it is an issue of liberation and justice.
Similarly, there are other resurgences as well. And so you have also spoken about it at certain platforms regarding history. And as we see the recent happenings, as on 23rd of January, the Prime Minister announced that there would be a Netaji statue in the Rajpath at the place where once the statue of King George V stood. So, is it not an indication of the fact that now we are taking cognizance of the fact that we need to decolonize in the first place, and we are going to take firm steps in this direction?
Sure. I think that's a very powerful question. Now, King George's statue uh, stayed in that place for 20 years. Now, why didn't anybody question that? How come it could lie for 20 years and nobody questioned, starting from the prime minister, the president, and the ordinary person, why there were no letters in the newspaper that if these people have left us, why is it that his statue still there? Millions of people travel by Rajpath. Millions of people travel mm, the 26th January parade that takes place over there. Children go to India Gate, right? Why is it that nobody questioned it? That why is the statue still there, right? I mean, 20 years means a whole 20 years means a whole generation, right? Okay. Now, the thing is that they did not question because as we know from studies of transgenerational trauma, is that it takes approximately 1 to 2 generations for people to start feeling comfortable after a mass trauma has happened. So, for example, whenever there is a mass trauma and it just gets over, people do not ask it immediately after it is over. After 20 years, 40 years, 1 to 2 generations, they start asking. So that was also true of our Indian society, that nobody questioned it for 20 years. And when it was removed, nobody also questioned that why it is lying vacant. Don't we have anyone else in order to put up over there? So this confusion, this the fact that we could not think of any person to put him over there for so long, what does it show us about our society? That it lay in a state of trance, it lay in a state of ambivalence, and we could not decide, right? Now, we have decided that now, right, after all this period, that the figure of Netaji needs to be there. He's the most suitable person to be there, no one else. No one has challenged and questioned it, right? So it has taken for us a simple for example, 70 years to fill up a simple space which was lying vacant, right? So, what I would say is that that is the decolonization narrative. First, we live in denial, then we do not question it for almost 50 years. And then, when we start wondering, then we put up the figure of Netaji, which who's the most rightful owner of that place, that is there, right? Now, is this something unusual? No, it is something that many societies, all societies go through, and we need to understand how we are going. For after the British left, for a long time, we did not question many things. The culture did not come about. And for 70 years, we did not ask difficult questions of our leaders, of ourselves, which we have started doing right now. It is somewhere a dangerous process because it leads us to deep. And as we know that one trauma, one event in history, if we question that, is connected to all other events of history. They're all bound in a chain. One comes up, the other also comes up. So the people who are uncomfortable with the statue of Netaji, questioning this because they are aware that other things also will start in the process after some time. They're all linked, together. And our society is at that crossroads where it is caught hold of that link, and all the what you call the untruths, the injustices that are we have gone through in the past 1000 years are going to come up one by one right now, right? It is a liberating process. It is also something that ruptures deep wounds, and we as a society need to be aware that we are suddenly rupturing deep wounds that have laid dormant and covered for decades, for centuries, for a long time. So we need to know that we are going towards that phase, where we are going to re-examine ourselves, see ourselves in the mirror once again. And what we are going to see is perhaps both unpleasant and also a story of resilience as to how we have survived. So psychologically, our society has to prepare for how we are going to be in the next 20 to 50 years. It's not going to be a path which we are going to retrace. It is a path where we are going to discover many untruths that have been told to us, many things that have been hidden from us, and how it is going to be for us as a society. Not very easy. Are we ready for it? Of course, we are ready for it, and we need to go for it. But what we also need is a healing touch at the same time for ourselves, for our children, for our grandchildren, so that they go through this and assimilate it within themselves.
Yes, you made a very important point. In the process of decolonization, this is the imperative stages that we have to face. On this occasion, when Prime Minister announced about the statue, our Foreign Minister S.J. Shankar, he tweeted, and I quote him that the presence of Netaji at India Gate is a long-awaited imperialism and compelled decolonization is being fittingly recognized. He also continued, this is a message from a new India. We will be true to ourselves when dealing with the world. And having said that, sir, it's not just about a granite statue. Given the
Yeah.
fact that Netaji was the person who challenged from the foreign soil the mightiest powers of that time, America, Anglo-Saxon forces, and Britain. So, acknowledging his contribution and bringing him to the Rajpath, I think, has a very deep message to the world also, as well as to our future generations. So, sir, do you think it as an indication towards that India is now ready to break off the colonial bondages?
Sure, very much, Ritul. Uh, I, as I told you in the beginning, I am a clinical psychologist and I'm a grief therapist. My area of work is grief of individuals, of societies, and what I see in what I would say that India, uh, the Hindu society is in grief right now, right? What is the grief about? We have lived in denial for many years, right? We have lived covering ourselves what was hidden from us, what we did not talk about. As we know that in the stages of grief, when we come out of it, we move from denial and we go on to protest. We are right now in the protest phase. We are protesting against what has been done, right? So, for example, putting Netaji's statue was a mark of protest, right? Okay. Uh, we see certain stages that individuals and societies go through when they finish their journey of grief. It is denial, then it is protest, then it is a deep sense of sadness that comes about, then it is a fear because we are going to break off our colonial yoke. We are going to separate ourselves from the British heritage, for example, the language, the way of thinking and talking, considering the Western narrative and media as superior. So we are going to, break away from that. And certain groups are already talking about that. Isn't it all good for us? Answer is no. We can have our own autonomous individual identity. And as we go from that, we move on to the phase of, finding a new meaning for ourselves. As we know from grief therapy and attachment theory, is that we find meaning in ourselves. Meaning is not imposed upon us. Macaulay imposed a meaning. The Western narrative, they imposed a meaning on us. That meaning we are in the process of rejecting ourselves. We are discovering a meaning in our society, in our heritage, in our culture, and that meaning is something that we will take as our own. And that is what, when India will become a Vishwa Guru, that is the path on which we are going. When we talk of being a Vishwa Guru, it is first to discover the meaning that we have in ourselves. So our society is a society going through grief and discovering these phases, going through one by one. And that is when a new India full of hope and resilience is going to rise. It may not happen in my generation, but I'm sure that it will happen in your generation and the generations that come after that. Nothing can really stop that. Societies go through grief, and societies emerge out of grief. And right now, the process has started when the Hindu society Bharat is in the protest phase. And we are protesting against, what has been imposed upon us. We will move through that. You will see it followed by a deep sense of sadness and fear, and then a rationalization, finding meaning in ourselves. That is the way I think, we are going, right? I would just finish with one small point that right now, for example, with the Kashmir files and what is, I see Kashmir files as part of a much larger process where the wound of Hindus as a society has ruptured. It has become open. There is this place in Africa called Point of No Return, where the blacks were taken, never to return. Now, one of my friends, who's a psychologist, visited that place, and he said that I noticed that blacks raising their fists over there like this, you know, sitting on the floor and crying. And the people who are doing this, they are very well settled, rich, well established in America. They go to that place to discover their roots, and they are discovering it. So this is a stage for, I would say, perhaps not only the Hindus in Bharat, but also other people to realize that what has been done to their history, and maybe the 21st century will be described as a century in which we undid what we had learned in the history in the past. And that is how Bharat as a Vishwaguru also would emerge, by undoing its false history.
Yes, sir. Similarly, we are seeing changes in our approach when we talk about national policy. We are taking into cognizance the ideas of nation first. And with the instances like Balakot, it is getting very evident that as a nation, we are prioritizing our own national security needs, and we are becoming more and more upfront about our national interest. So, sir, do you think it is somewhere related to the fact that now we are recognizing that we need to rise and there is a political will behind it?
Sure. I think that political will is coming from the second stage of grief, what I call the protest stage. We are protesting against the injustices which has happened to us in the past. We are protesting against the way meaning has been thrust upon us. We are protesting against many things in that we see around ourselves right now. But in behind all that, there is a fundamental idea that we will not be mistreated anymore. We will not take unfairness anymore. We will not go ahead and accept things blindly anymore, right? This is a psychological phase that our society right now is, going through. And it is also seen in the way when someone attacks us right now. The Hindu who has been defensive for decades, for centuries, is learning to hit back. So whether it is Pakistan who hits us or whether it is China who hits us, who enters our territory, thinking that they will, gain unrestrained access to whatever they were wanting, we are right now going ahead and pushing them back, hitting them back with all our might. So the Hindu is seeing the himself in a very different way. I talk of two kinds of Hinduism that I see in front of me. One is the Hinduism of the Vedas, the scriptures, which has given the world perhaps the deepest philosophy and source of wisdom that any religion, any book, could have given, right? That is one part of it. But that also made us too introspective. We forgot in some ways to fight, to, struggle. And what happened in the last 1000 years is that the story of Hinduism is a story of struggle, of fighting back. And I think that this is what is something that needs to be taught to our children, to our grandchildren, that how we Hindus have fought back. There is a glorious history of fighting back, of not giving in. We have resisted, right? And as I see that all other societies, for example, whether it is blacks or Jews, or societies which have faced persecution, even aborigines of Australia, they teach their children about how they fought back against expansions, against barbarism, against everything. So we need to start a similar process over here by talking about the part of Hinduism that has struggled to keep itself alive. We may have shrunk, but we nobody has been able to exterminate us, to annihilate us, and we will fight back in order to push back. So whether it is in Doklam or whether it is bordering Pakistan or whether it is bordering anywhere else, the present Hindu is someone who is learning to push back and hit back. And this is the struggling Hindu. This is the Hindu which is refusing to accept that he can be treated unfairly anymore.
Yes, sir. Very rightly you just described the scenario. Also, so this brings me to another question about Hinduism, and as you said, that this is the road that has to be followed if we wish to see India becoming a Vishwa Guru. So, as every civilization has its own unique operating system, and as Aurobindo spoke about spiritual nationalism, Swami Vivekananda spoke about Hinduism being the soul of this civilization. So, and also in current times, we are seeing that many societies across the world are embracing Hinduism, and they find solace and peace in this particular way of life and philosophy. So, is it not the time that we very proudly and bravely fashion our identity and wear it on our sleeves and take
Absolutely.
pride in being a Hindu?
Absolutely. Now, I can share with you a story. Um, for example, many physicists, they have a statue of Nataraj in their homes, right? Many quantum physicists, some of the world's most well-known physicists, studied Hinduism. But do you read that in a book on physics? For example, how would you react if you see that in CERN in Switzerland, there is a huge statue of Nataraja. Now, we take pride in the fact that it is Nataraj, but do we know that why so many physicists turn to Nataraja? Because he represents the best concept of entropy that exists anywhere. which means, I mean, and I'm not using the word in a pejorative or negative sense, disorder. Like Shiva's Tandav dance, physicists find it fascinating and it helps them to conceptualize, to go into the concept of disorder, of chaos, of how the universe came into the being. There is no better explanation than that, right? Now, a famous physicist told me this. It is very well known, but have we gone ahead and researched and do we tell this to our children, the reason behind so, right? We need to start, doing right now, because that is how we can counter the negative propaganda, the negative things being said about our religion everywhere. Its depth, its philosophy, what it teaches us, and what it teaches everyone else, the scientific roots of it. I think we need to go ahead and tell the world about it to make people aware of the whole process. So that is pedagogy of a different kind. And I think that we need intellectuals over here in India who will teach that to our children and our grandchildren. We need to start doing that.
Yes, and as Swami Vivekananda, he took the message of Vedanta to across many countries and he in overseas, and he brought back home pride. Similarly, efforts I think should be made in our current times as well. And so this brings me to my next question. And I think, as you said, that we are currently in a phase of protest. So at different levels in the sphere of academics, in sphere of education, or people dealing with public policy or leaders, what are the different things or measures we can take up at individual levels or collective, as a collective effort to further the process of decolonization?
Okay, since you asked me, and I'm a professor, I teach. I'll I tell you that uh, you know, uh, for example, one of the subjects that I teach is trauma. When I teach about trauma in the class, uh, I have sometimes often Kashmiri Muslim students get up and immediately talk about their trauma, of and and their narrative is something very much there. Indian forces, they have, uh, mm, uh, they control the whole space. They have committed so many atrocities, right? I have also Kashmiri Pandits, Hindu students in my class. They never get up and talk about the trauma that has happened, to them, to their community. Why is that so? Why is it that one community students, they immediately are able to, get up and protest and talk about their trauma, while the other community does not? Now we need to start teaching this to our children. So the day when, for example, it is just not the Kashmir files, but an average Kashmiri student in the class gets up and say, "Hey, I want to talk about how I ran away on the night of 19th January," right? An average Kashmiri gets up and talks about what has happened to them and does not remain silent. So the most important thing, as I see, is that in every forum possible, we need to break this rule of silence that engulfs us. We know that the language of trauma is silence, and we Hindus have stayed in silence for too long. We have to break this level of silence, become self-aware beings to fight for our rights. I give you an example. When 2 years back I went to USA to give talks, some of the talks were held at temples. And before the talk would start, one particular temple, it was near New Jersey. The priest asked me, "What are you going to talk about? Some scholarly topic about Hinduism?" So I said, "No, I'm going to talk about the threat that Hinduism faces, the way it is being annihilated and exterminated, and how we need to protect." He was surprised. He says, "Is Hinduism under threat? Is Hinduism facing annihilation?" I say, "Yes." He says, "Are you sure you want to talk about this? Because it's a temple and we don't talk about." I said, "I'm going to talk about Hindu identity. I'm a psychologist. Hinduism has vanished from Afghanistan. It has vanished almost from Pakistan, from Kashmir, from Bangladesh. So many countries, Hindus have felt exterminated. So if we talk about it, then we make people aware of how our religion is under threat, and that is something I want to talk about. He was surprised. He says, "I'm not sure that that's a very relevant topic." Now he gave me permission after much debating, right? Now, this is a priest who's completely unaware how much how much of a damage he is doing to his religion, to his people, by not being a self-aware person. If a priest is not aware, how will other people be aware? Right? So this is a change that we need to bring about in terms of the part of Hinduism that has struggled, survive itself, and get to know that part, teach that part to our children. That is the only way in which we can save our religion. That is the only way we can stop it from getting annihilated. That is what I think that we need to do as at a pedagogical, level. In another temple where I went, and I went to a few temples just like that, uh, there were this couple of Indian American families who were there, who had brought their children to listen to some Hindu scriptures and discourses. So when I went, I was introduced to them, and this we started talking, and they said, what is our biggest fear? That our children will become Christians. So I said, okay. So what are you doing to solve that? Oh, we have brought them over here to the temples to listen to the priest. So I said, okay. After the talk is over, do you mind if I talk to them for some time? They said, no, 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 not at all. I think it will be very good if you should. So I asked them. I said, how was the talk? Oh my God, we have to go through and attend this, right? I mean, it is something so disgusting, but we sit through. So I said, okay, can I talk to you for some time about Hinduism as I know? I told I told it to them in a very different language, in the language of a psychologist. And when they went back, one of the parents called me up to say that, what did you talk to them? Because those children are talking about that. Why can't people like that come, and talk to us about Hinduism? Why do we have to listen to that? So, to such boring lectures. So I said, okay, can't you prepare people who, using simple say lecturing principles or pedagogical principles, can teach them so that the whole topic becomes interesting? Christian priests do that. Muslim priests do that. They are actually given training in how to talk to children about their religion, about their dharma. But why are we not doing it? Can't we see that it is the need of the hour? So therefore, I would strongly, suggest, and this is something I talk of at every forum, the need to be self-aware and, carry it on. The need to use management principles to teach children about such an important topic. That is what I think needs to be done.
So AK Singh ji asks, Dr. Mitra, what is the contribution of history to making of a society, and is history of a Rashtra analogs to the history of an individual? And I refer to the effect of amnesia on individual personality. Yeah. So this is
Yeah.
the question which is to ask.
Okay, I think that's a very good question, Dr. Singh. And I would like to say that when you say what is the contribution of history to in making a society, obviously it's enormous. But more important than history is what we call as memory. If we look at memory studies, today, what we find is that history and memory are often at loggerheads with each other. Our history tells us something, our memory tells us something else. And it is our memory that we carry inside. And Hindus have carried their memory inside. They carried the memory of, for example, Ram Janmabhoomi for 5 centuries, right? The history of Ram Janmabhoomi was quite different. Every attempt was made to obliterate the fact that it was a temple once. But the memory proved to be more powerful. We allowed ourselves to be dictated by our memory. Our memory is our conscience. And today also we are standing at a crossroads of debating between history and memory in our society. So I would say that more than history, it is the memory that is makes a greater contribution to a society and will make to our society. What is the memory that we have about, say, the thousands of temples that have been destroyed in India? It is not destroyed. The memory remains. You go to the people, you go to the area where the temple was destroyed, you talk to people, and they will give you a rich history of the memory which has made them survive. There is a temple near my place, one of the oldest temples in Delhi, called Yogmaya Temple, right? And there are people who have, preserved it from invaders. Where the real temple was, they built another temple. They have carried it. I was talking to some of them, and I was fascinated with the rich, uh, you know, uh, facts, the memory, the motivation that has made them carry the whole thing, over for almost centuries, right? So memory is more powerful, and today for Bharatvarsh, for us, our memory of how we have held together, whether it is, Rana Pratap, or in uh, 11th century, the way we fought with Muhammad Ghori, all those memories remain inside us. And that is something that has gone on as a form of a transgenerational trauma, as we know. It is not gone as yet, it is surfacing right now. So I would say that, in a way, more important than history is the memory that we carry right now of the last 1,000 years in ourselves. That will be a potent force in changing our society.
Yes, sir. There is one observation Malaji makes here, and I'll read out. She requests me to read that out. She says one of the way to decolonize our own selves is to include more Indic words. One suggestion: instead of sir, maybe use Shriman or G or any other Indic word to show respect to others.
More Indic words. One suggestion: instead of sir, maybe use Shriman or Ji or Indic word to show respect to others. Of course, I totally agree with that. I don't think that, it is the all these words, they are, part of our colonizing. Like, for example, I get very uncomfortable if someone calls me Saab. For example, today when I took a cab and I went and he says, Sab, darwaza khol do. And I feel very uncomfortable. I told him that don't call me Saab. I hate that word. I don't like it. So he was puzzled. He said, मैंने कुछ गलत बोला क्या? तो मैंने कहा कि देखो, मैं सांप जैसा गोरा तो नहीं हूँ, राइट? और मैं तुम्हारे जैसा ही हूँ, और मैं तुम्हें पैसे दे रहा हूँ जाने के लिए, तो तुम मुझे सांप क्यों बोलोगे, right? So he started laughing. So there are numerous words like that whose meanings are deeply, pejorative, and I think we need to start with that. I have absolutely, no disagreement on that. It must be done.
Also, a question in the form of an input which comes from Gautam Ghoshi, and I'll read that out. First, there is an enforced culture of silence, and thereafter comes the conspiracy of denial. This is essential to maintain the status quo for the privileged establishment. Present government didn't do enough to unshackle the media apparatus that is already available under their disposal. Doordarshan is the classic example of white elephant that has been sterile and totally ineffective. So, yeah. Yes.
I think it is more a comment. I entirely agree with that. That's what I would like to say, that the present government didn't do enough, and also the people also did not do enough. Both of us, we kind of, I mean, didn't. And it is perhaps, the government will only do something when people first of all rise and make a protest that this is something which is, not happening. So it has to first come from people. That is what I feel. We need to write. We need to talk more about it. We need to take a stance. It's like my students over here. Very often when I ask them that, okay, what is your standpoint? Take a stand. So I find that they are very hesitant, very ambivalent in taking a stand, and that is often an effect of the colonization. Slaves could not take a stand. Slaves were taught not to make a stand. It is only the masters who could take a stance. And it is something that we need to tell our students. Other day, I gave an assignment in the class and I said, I'm not bothered about what you write about it. I want to know whether you agree or disagree with it or not. Most students found it difficult, right? They could copy and paste from different sources, but they could not say yes and no to that. That to me is a sign of, colonization, that we do not take a stand. We leave it to others. We expect others to solve a problem. And I think that is a major issue for us. So one process of decolonization is to say, yes, I agree or I disagree, and stop there and not be afraid about it. Yeah.
Dr. Singh wants to ask a question. Sir, you may please go ahead with your question.
Dr. Mitra, thank you for responding. In response to what you said, the topic today you chose for yourself is decolonization of the history. Now, the history that we're talking about here is obviously by that we mean that history that, as we are taught, has been in some way manipulated.
Yes.
It is that manipulation that we need to rectify. But then there's always a problem. You're a psychologist, so you know that human beings can remember quite wrongly. The past experiences can be aggravated either way, magnified either way.
Sure.
And third point in the same thing is that human beings, societies are like human beings. Their memory can be wiped out, and whatever else needs to be put into this place can always be put in. The example being Jason Brown, Bourne or Bourne Identity, if anyone has read that. You wipe out the memory, and after that, the person has no clue as to who he is, and then you can add whatever you want to add. Replace that. Replace. Our memory, as we are taught, has been replaced. When you talk to the younger kids, that's what you get. That's what you get an idea about. Your response, sir?
Yeah. Okay. You used the word history. You did not use the word memory. And what I understand is that when history gets changed, it gets changed because of a memory that has been held on for a long time. And I'm using the word memory along with what we know as transgenerational trauma, the memory of an event that we have carried for generations, right? Yes, of course, I agree with you that there is a possibility that memory can be falsified, but memory is also truth. I do not believe that all memory is falsified. There is a lot of memory which is genuine, which is true, and which is something that we hold on to, dear. I have a memory of 1984 riots, right? This is very different from the history, the way it is written about 1984, and I know that it is something that hundreds and thousands like me also carry within themselves, right? So that is collective memory that we hold on to. And yes, there may be some people who may have a different memory, but there is a total collective memory that cannot be falsified. So that is the memory that I'm talking about.
Dr. Mitra.
Yeah.
Can I ask one?
Sure.
Yeah. So, considering the situation, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Afghanistan, and the global situation, so what are the action items for Hindus right now? What Hindus should do right now? The top priorities.
I think the top priority right now is to raise a collective voice. Like, for example, in what I understand is that in Uttar Pradesh, the present government, won only because Hindus became a collective force and voted, right? So becoming a collective from being individual is probably the biggest priority. So anything that makes us come together, submerges our differences, is what I would say is the need of the hour. It's the biggest need. It needs to be done intellectually. It needs to be done, physically. It needs to be done in all ways, and it needs to be done both at a micro level and at a macro level. So, for example, the other day someone was saying, "Sir, it is very good to know that using the word because he didn't say Shriman, he said sir. It's very good that you people are beginning to speak about Hinduism. But I said that is not the best thing. The best thing is when everybody starts talking about it. When in schools, in colleges, in environment, in all these environments, people are not afraid to talk about their heritage towards, their uh, history, their past, and they're able to bring that up. That is what I feel is very important, that it happens both at a micro level and at a macro level. So if we, for example, go at Capitol Hill and talk about it, yes, great. But the average Hindu also needs to start talking about it with wider dissemination of literature, films, and in every way, so that the struggle of Hinduism is brought about.
Another thing, say British invaded and ruled many countries, and then they implemented their policy and their narratives they propagated. Arabs and Turks and Afghans also invaded and ruled and built their narrative and influenced people. So why we Indians failed to do that in last say 1,000 years? So what is our lacking and what is their strength so they are able to do it? So is it a positive thing from a psychologist point of view that they are able to do it and we are incapable of doing it? Why it's like this?
The British, as I have found, they were great psychologists. They analyzed the reasons. Why did they build Andamans? They built it because they felt that if people are taken away from the land, then they feel that they lose their identity, their caste, and other issues, right? And they built structures. Their institutions were built upon having studied intensively the psyche of Indians. They did that. So that's a very good thing. You study the people, right? In the same way they studied us. The Muslims before that, the Mohammedan who came over here, did not study the Hindus psychologically. They were crude. They were not so polished intellectual. They didn't have the finesse. When the British came, they found that the Muslims had already, what you call controlled and exercised the Hindus into submission. They had just to continue that process without using great force. So that's what they did. They studied us psychologically, built the institutions, and carried along with their empire building, and did that, right. So it's a good thing, and we need to study about people who have controlled us, about people who have dominated us, as to how they dominated over us, and how could they do it. The last thing is that we turn too much inwards. We, because of our philosophy, because of our dharma, because of our focus and insistence upon that, we only followed a very rigid, structured way of doing things. Like we will not fight after dark, like we will follow dharma while fighting. So our enemies did not follow that. Our enemies did not, believe in that at all. And it is important to know that in today's world, the same rule applies. So that awareness is very important, to learn from why we lost, why we remained slaves. It needs to be taught in every school textbook. If we don't do that, I have a feeling that if we don't do it, that if this awareness doesn't come about, we might become slaves again.
And another thing that in this context, since the those who are non-Hindus of Indian subcontinent, their forefathers at some point were Hindus or Buddhists or indigenous culture following. So do they have any psychological issues since they got converted at some
Oh,
point of
yes.
time in the history? So is there any psychological, do they have any psychological issues, and why is that, and how to
Uh,
address that?
Okay, first of all, let me put it like this, that uh, I believe that most conversions in India, in Bharat, took place either through allurement or through force. It was not an intellectual, it was not a spiritual, transformative conversion that took place. The people who converted, they have, many undealt emotions, particularly anger, shame, and humiliation that they carry inside. and there is a dislike towards the Hindus. There is a dislike, for example, the Christians who converted, the Muslims who converted. We see deep fissures and antagonism between the two. And it is important to make them aware of their history, of what happened. We haven't tried that as yet. We have not gone to them and said that, look, hey, this is what has happened in your past. We as a society, we have only started looking at our past right now, in terms of being introspective, in terms of looking at it dispassionately, what happened. We have not started going back to our roots. The people who converted, once they start doing that, I feel that they will look at the actions of their ancestors in a new and different way. And I think that that can only happen when we put up the issue, when we bring it on the table. We have not started doing that as yet.
Yeah. Say, we have our own history, our own civilization. But see, right now, say, USA and the Europe, these Western countries, they dominate in the economy, in technology, science sector, in politics. They influence the world. So now, but though we have this ancient civilization, culture, all these things, but we don't dominate in the world. So how do we balance between the two? That we have civilization, we have these good things, but we are not in a position to dominate like them. So they have built the narrative and they are successful in influencing the world. So yeah, how do we do that? So we are using Zoom, but it's an US product or something, or Facebook or Google. So they dominate in different ways. So how do you balance these two, that our thing and the things of their things?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. I would like to say that I don't think we are looking for domination, because for me, domination means control. I don't think that we want to control the world, right? And I think that what the USA and Europe and much of Europe, they have done, the control has been deceitful, extremely manipulative. It has led to millions of deaths. They have created wars, riots, violence of a kind, some of the worst systems. I don't think that that kind of domination is something that we are looking for. What I would like to say, what I would also like to say is that where is all that domination, leading them to be? Is it, leading? It's all falling apart right now in front of our very eyes. And today, India, Bharatvarsh is rising right now. And how do we rise? We use the systems of others. Uh, America may be having a lot of the systems, but many of them are headed by Indians. NASA is headed by Indians. For example, the medical system in USA or the system in UK. We need to be aware that somewhere this happened because of certain weaknesses and because of certain faults in ourselves that we need to correct, right? And once we do that, we can rectify those mistakes, we can rectify that and bring about a change. But as we do that, we will rise through our own inner power. And I believe that it will be very different from the way America or Europe has controlled the world, right? What have they done to the world? I mean, yes, if you look at it, uh, Germany had his intellectuals, but they have also created world wars and Holocaust. What is there to look up to? I mean, Europeans, the ones I meet, or white Americans whom I meet, many of them are ashamed of their culture and their civilization. They're ashamed when they learn about their past. So I don't look forward that kind of domination at all. So it's an awareness that I think it should make you yourself proud in yourself, in everything. And I think that that is something that we can do.
Debash had asked a question, and I'm asking as a corollary to that. Pakistan studies is a subject which the children in Pakistan start learning from their childhood, from their kindergarten side. And there they are taught the history of Pakistan as starting from 714 or 715 when Muhammad bin Qasim came. So everything before that is literally washed out. Nothing is there. So is this a method of completely eradicating the past memories and inserting new ones? Is this what is happening there? And can such a thing be ever remedied? Because already 3 generations have undergone that. And today what you're seeing as the behavior of a Pakistani is based on the education which has been given to him the last 3 generations. Now, can such education be ever reversed? Is it possible?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Ramakrishnan. That's, I think, is a hypothetical question, and I will try to answer the best I can. One is that it is difficult to eradicate history. So, for example, an example comes to mind as the Armenian genocide. The Armenian government tried very hard to obliterate it. The Turkish government tried very hard for that, but they did not succeed. After 80 years, facts began to come, to light because people held that in their memories. Now, if we see Pakistan, yes, they are not taught, but I also know that, most Pakistanis, when they go abroad and they learn that it is the truth is not, what they have been taught, find it deeply confusing and come back feeling very disillusioned. Their lack of trust in the government becomes, much more pronounced. So it is my personal belief that history, the memory cannot be eradicated. It is somewhere, it has a way of bursting through. If we see something based on unjust lies or untruth, it is not something that is permanent. It breaks open, it has fissures. How it happens is a mystery to me also, but I do believe that it very much exists and it happens.